Welcome to The Backstory with Dr. Ricky Singh. This podcast is focused on bringing you the latest research-based information about dramatically improving health, well-being, and quality of life. And here's your host, Dr. Ricky Singh.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Backstory. I hope you had a nice weekend. And today I want to talk about something that has probably happened to all of us. You know, it's close to dinner, the workday is complete, your stomach is grumbling a little bit, and all of a sudden, your significant other or your roommate or whoever does some cleaning or vacuuming, and all of a sudden, this becomes too much to bear, and you lash out. And what I'm talking about is Hangry, and you've just become the next victim of Hangry. And Hangry is a combination of being hungry and being angry, hence the word Hangry or hangry. And whether or not you've experienced it, you probably know someone who has. But the question is this really a physiological phenomenon or just a grown-up way of us crying for our bottle like when we were kids? And I'm here to set the record straight and say it's not an excuse. It's actually a physiologic and psychological condition. Basically what happens when your blood sugar gets too low, it triggers a cascade of hormones, including cortisol, which is the stress hormone that circulates in our body, and adrenaline, which is the fight or flight hormone. And basically these hormones are released into your bloodstream to raise and rebalance your blood sugar. Because if your blood sugar falls far enough, your brain will perceive that you're in a life-threatening situation. You see, a lot of our organs and other tissues can use a variety of nutrients to keep functioning. But the brain is specially dependent on glucose and ketones to some extent, which is why the keto diet is so popular. But for our intents and purposes, it's really relying on glucose to function. So when your blood sugar or blood glucose fall, you get hungry. And when you're hungry, you effectively impair your brain power. The parts of our brain that are associated with hunger and fear and anger and anxiety is called the limbic system. And what happens is we take information from the limbic system, as well as other information from our surroundings, from our environment. We send this up to the higher brain, to the cortex, where all this information is processed, and then we act and behave in a conscious way. And that's probably why we're not walking around yelling at everyone. Yes, I guess, we live in Manhattan in New York City, and we do see people walking around and yelling at everyone. But for the most part, we control our actions and control our behavior. But if you have low glucose levels, it means that the higher brain functions are not working that well, or as well as they should be, so that there might be a breakdown in those higher brain functions that help us modulate primitive responses. And experiments have been done to show this. In fact, a PhD candidate from the University of North Carolina, Dr. Jennifer McCormick, her and her colleagues actually studied how hunger can affect personality and emotions. And what they did was they took 200 college students and asked half of them to fast or half of them to eat before they came into the lab. When they came into the lab, some of the students were asked to complete a writing exercise about their emotions, and others wrote about an everyday life experience. And then they were subjected to a stressful situation. Basically, they were asked to do a project on a computer that crashed right before the end of the time. And their research assistant came in and kind of blamed the students for all their computer trouble. What they found was that when the research subjects filled out questionnaires asking them about their emotions and overall how the experiment went, the students who hadn't eaten were much more likely to report feeling stressed out and actually used the word hatred towards the research assistant. And what the study concluded was that people who were hungry were less aware of their emotional states and reacted with anger and frustration compared to those that were full and satisfied prior to the start of the experiment. Another reason that hunger is linked to anger is that both of these emotions are controlled with the same chemical. This is something called Neuropeptide Y. And basically, it's a brain chemical that's released from the brain when you're hungry. It stimulates feeding behaviors. But in addition to controlling hunger, Neuropeptide Y and its receptor also regulate anger or aggression. And it kind of makes sense because hunger is your brain's way of signaling release of these hormones, that increase glucose into the bloodstream so that your tissues don't starve. It's actually a life-threatening situation. So why does this happen? And it all comes down to an interference in the body's homeostasis or balance or equilibrium. Hunger actually causes a lot of shifts in hormones in brain processes, similar to what we see in anger, fear, and sometimes even sadness. The reason why we have emotions to begin with is to help our bodies maintain this balance or maintain this homeostasis. And your brain is always trying to monitor your body and make sure you're in balance. So when you're not, it sends a signal to the body that, hey, you need to do something. You need to shift some things around. And that shift out of homeostasis into the state of hunger is often experienced as negative. There's a cascade of hormones like cortisol and fight or flight responses and others. And ultimately, it's your brain's way of sending a signal to your body that's saying, hey, things are not looking so good and you need to figure something out. So how do we treat hanger? Or how do you get less hangry? And certainly the easiest way to handle being hangry is to eat something. But before you run and chase your favorite junk food like a candy bar or a bag of potato chips, think about what you're actually putting into your body. We've all seen that Snickers commercial where the person is not acting like themselves because they're hangry and they say, grab your Snickers. Certainly part of that's true because that will satisfy your hunger pains. But these foods typically contain refined carbohydrates and lots of added sugars, which sure will momentarily cure the hangriness with the blood sugar spike. But rest assured, this is going to result in a big drop in blood sugar, leaving you feeling lethargic, tired, and probably hangry once again. So you want to grab something that's going to sustain your hunger and prevent blood sugar from spiking to begin with. Things that are nutrient-rich, natural foods like berries, nuts, fruits, things like that that will control the hunger and also keep you satisfied a lot longer. The other thing I want to touch about is mindful eating. And basically, mindful eating it's trendy. It's the thing everyone's talking about these days. It's just a way to become self-aware of your hunger and satiety cues and kind of apply a set of habits around eating. And the principle is easy. Eat when you're hungry and stop eating when you're not hungry. But remember, our relationship with food is not just physiologic. It's emotional. It is personal. It can be cued by imagery and visual and smells and sounds. And yes, food provides energy to the body so your body can perform vital functions. And in return, the body can control your food intake by modulating your hunger signals. And when we need more fuel due to physical activity, we get hungry. And this is in part due to the release of a hormone called ghrelin from the stomach. And conversely, the hormone leptin is released to stem hunger when the body is properly fed. And the way I remember that is ghrelin greatens your appetite and leptin lessens your appetite. And there's a fine balance on the ghrelin-leptin axis that controls how hungry we are. Some of the factors associated with the change of these two hormones include age. As we age, leptin levels decrease. Sex. Females tend to have higher levels of leptin compared to males. And exercise. Increasing physical activity may reduce leptin, which makes sense because you get hungrier with more exercise. That being said, there are other factors that impact what you perceive as hunger. Interestingly, the area of the hypothalamus that controls appetite also controls sleep. Therefore, there have been studies conducted where sleep-restricted individuals have reduced leptin and increased ghrelin, which makes them hungrier. There was a study performed that showed if individuals were sleep-deprived, they tend to eat between 300 and 500 more calories a day, even though their body wasn't actually hungry. It was just their brain telling them to eat because of this imbalance in ghrelin and leptin. In addition, higher stress levels can impact the foods that you choose and just eating in general. Foods that contain high fat and high sugars can trigger dopamine release. We know that dopamine is linked to your brain's reward center. So when you eat these foods, it kind of makes you feel good, which makes sense when you are stressed and have increased stress levels. It can inadvertently lead us back to choosing some of these foods that trigger this dopamine release, such as foods that are high in fat, high in sugar, candy bars, and things like that. Higher levels of cortisol or stress are also associated with higher ghrelin levels, resulting in increased appetite. It's important to really identify stress when it comes around so that you can differentiate, are you really hungry or are you just stressed? And by recognizing and becoming aware of this, you can modulate how much you eat. And the practice of mindful eating can help you in this process. So there's a few techniques when it comes to being mindful and being self-aware of how you eat that I wanted to share with you. So the first is to exercise regularly. We've talked at length about exercise, how much you need on a weekly basis. The data, the literature, the many societies support 150 minutes a week, which will support a healthy metabolism. And when you have a healthy metabolism, your body is going to be able to better recognize those hunger cues more effectively. Drinking plenty of water can also help eating too much. It's very often that when you're dehydrated, your body often mistakes hunger versus dehydration, both modulated in the same area of the brain. So instead of grabbing food, just think about how much water you're drinking every day. Another tip is to use smaller plates. That can help you with portion control. By using smaller dishes, your brain tends to think that you've eaten more than you actually have, and you serve yourself less food. Chewing also helps produce leptin. And if you chew slowly and thoroughly, many research cite up to 20 times per food, you will likely feel fuller because you have released leptin in the body. In the end, hunger is a survival mechanism, and being hangry is just part of the process. If hungry organisms stood back and let others eat before them, then our species would have died out. So don't beat yourself up over being hangry every once in a while. So when you're hangry, you're not just more prone to snap at somebody because you're hungry on a physical level. You're actually hungry at a cerebral level, at a brain level. And that deprivation of calories impacts your filters so that you snap and you don't have that moment to process and modulate your responses. So if you or someone you know suffers from hunger, give them a little break. Encourage them towards a path of becoming more self-aware and being more mindful. After all, they may not have mood swings, they might have food swings. Hope this helped. Hope you guys have a nice week. And remember, when it comes to your health and wellness, we here at The Backstory, we've got your back. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Backstory. Please subscribe, rate the podcast, and review The Backstory on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Play Music. And feel free to share this podcast on social media or even your own website or blog. This podcast is for general information purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice. To learn more about Dr. Singh and his clinical research, please follow him on social media. You can also sign up for his newsletter by going to www.rickysinghmd.com. That's RICKYSINGHMD.com.